You're standing in the children's section of a bookstore. Or maybe you're scrolling through Amazon at midnight, your newborn finally asleep, your brain completely fried. And you're looking at hundreds of books. The Whole Brain Child, Raising Good Humans, No Drama Discipline, The Montessori Method, Attachment Parenting, Gentle Parenting, Tiger Mom, Free-Range Kids. They all contradict each other. They all promise everything. And somewhere in the back of your head, a quiet, terrifying thought forms. What if I'm doing this wrong? Here's the thing nobody in that bookstore will tell you. For 300,000 years, human beings raised children without a single one of those books, without pediatricians, without school systems, without developmental psychologists, without sleep training consultants, without screen time guidelines, without report cards, without enrichment activities, without any of it. And the children they raised? Those children survived ice ages. They learned to hunt animals bigger than trucks. They developed language, art, music, spirituality. They walked out of Africa and populated every corner of the planet. They built every civilization you've ever read about. So the question isn't whether ancient humans knew how to raise children. The question is, what did they know that we've completely forgotten? And the answer, once you start looking at the evidence, is both humbling and a little unsettling. Because it turns out that the most expensive, most anxious, most intensively managed childhood in the history of our species might not actually be producing better adults. It might be producing something else entirely. This is the story of how humans actually raised children. Not the parenting influencer version, not the TED Talk version, the real one. And it goes back further than any book, further than any school, further than any system anyone ever invented. Let's start with the most fundamental question. What does a child actually need? Not what we think they need, not what the market tells us they need. What does the research, the anthropology, the evolutionary biology actually say? The answer is surprisingly simple, and we've been overcomplicating it for about 100 years. A child needs three things: attachment, autonomy, and community. That's it. That's the whole architecture. Every other thing, the flashcards, the structured activities, the academic preschools, the parenting philosophies, is either a way of delivering one of those three things or a way of accidentally interfering with them. And ancient humans, with no books and no experts, delivered all three in a way that modern researchers are only beginning to understand and quietly envy. Let's start with attachment, because this is where the modern world went most dramatically wrong. When John Bowlby first developed attachment theory in the 1950s, he was considered radical. The idea that a child's emotional bond with a caregiver was not just emotionally important, but biologically necessary, that it literally shaped the architecture of the developing brain, was controversial. The dominant view at the time, pushed by behaviorists like John Watson, was that too much affection would spoil a child. Watson literally told parents not to hug their children too much, not to respond to every cry, to treat emotional neediness as a habit to be broken. This was not fringe advice. This was mainstream American parenting for decades. And here's what's wild. The ancient way was the exact opposite. Across virtually every hunter-gatherer society ever studied, infant care looks strikingly similar. Babies are held almost constantly, not because anyone told parents to do it, but because it was simply what you did. The Kung San of the Kalahari, one of the most extensively studied foraging groups on the planet, carry their infants in a sling against the mother's body for the first year of life. The child is in physical contact with a caregiver for roughly 90% of daylight hours. They breastfeed on demand, sometimes dozens of times a day. They respond to crying immediately, almost every time. And multiple adults are involved, not just the mother. Grandmothers, aunts, older sisters, other women in the group. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy has spent decades arguing that humans evolved not as nuclear family parents, but as what she calls cooperative breeders. That the basic unit of human child rearing was never a mother and a father alone in a house. It was a network, a village, literally. The isolation of the modern nuclear family, one or two parents, alone, in a house, responsible for everything, is one of the strangest and most recent experiments in the history of our species. And the data on how it's going is not great. Rates of postpartum depression are higher in countries with weaker social support networks. Parental burnout is a recognized clinical phenomenon. Childhood anxiety disorders have been rising for decades. The loneliness epidemic affects parents and children alike. We built a parenting system that removed the village and then wondered why everyone is exhausted. Now let's talk about autonomy, because this is the second pillar, and it's the one that modern parenting has most completely dismantled. Look at the Hadza of Tanzania. Researchers who have lived with them and observed child development have noticed something striking. Hadza children are given a level of freedom that would make the average American parent's heart stop. By age 4 or 5, children roam the camp and the nearby bush with other children, largely unsupervised. They climb trees. They play with sharp sticks and fire. They participate in food preparation using real tools. By 10 or 11, boys are going on small hunting expeditions. Girls are gathering food and contributing meaningfully to the group's survival. They are not managed. They are not scheduled. They are not protected from boredom. They are not enrolled in activities chosen by adults to build specific skills. They play freely with other children of mixed ages for hours and hours every single day. And this matters enormously because free play, the kind where children invent their own rules and solve their own problems and navigate their own conflicts without adult intervention, is not a luxury or a break from development. It is how development happens. Peter Gray, a developmental psychologist at Boston College, who has spent decades studying this, argues that the collapse of free play in the modern world is directly related to the rise of childhood anxiety and depression. When children are not allowed to take risks, to fail, to get into conflicts with other children and resolve them, they don't build the psychological resilience those experiences are supposed to create. You can't teach a child courage by keeping them safe from everything that requires it. The ancient way produced children who were extraordinarily competent, children who could light a fire, track an animal, read weather patterns, navigate by stars, children who had deep knowledge of the natural world, of plants and seasons and animal behavior, knowledge that was literally the difference between life and death. We look at that and call it a simpler time, but the cognitive demands of that life were enormous. The knowledge required was vast. Children acquired it not through sitting in rows being talked at, but through observation, imitation, participation, and play. The third pillar is community, and this is where the contrast with modern childhood becomes almost painful. In a hunter-gatherer band, a child is born into a web of relationships that will sustain them for their entire life. They know every adult in the group. Every adult knows them. There is no stranger. There is no anonymity. From the very first days of life, a child is passed between arms, held by people other than their parents, introduced to the full social world of the group. Children of different ages play together constantly. A 7-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 4-year-old are in the same group, and that mixing is not accidental. It's essential. Older children learn to lead, to teach, to be responsible for younger ones. Younger children learn by watching those who are slightly ahead of them, not by being segregated into cohorts of identical age and ability. The age-segregated school classroom, which we treat as the obvious and natural way to educate children, is an invention, a recent one. It was designed in the 19th century to prepare children for factory work, to teach them to sit still, follow instructions, perform tasks on command, and submit to external authority. Not because that's how children learn best, but because that's what the industrial economy needed from them. The results are measurable. Children in mixed-age play environments show higher levels of cooperation, more advanced social reasoning, and greater empathy. They also show lower levels of aggression, because in a mixed-age group, a 5-year-old can't bully a 12-year-old. The natural hierarchy, based on competence and maturity, creates its own discipline. The ancient community also did something else that modern parenting struggles to replicate. It gave children purpose, not scheduled purpose, not curated purpose, real purpose. A child in a hunter-gatherer band knew that their contributions mattered. When they gathered berries, those berries fed the group. When they helped with younger children, they were genuinely needed. Their existence had weight and consequence in the real world from very early on. David Lancy, an anthropologist who has spent his career studying childhood across across cultures, describes the modern Western childhood as a period of prolonged incompetence. We protect children from everything useful, and then wonder why so many of them arrive at adulthood with no sense of agency or purpose. There's a concept he uses: weird parenting, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. And he points out, carefully and precisely, that weird parenting, the kind described in all those books at the bookstore, is the global exception, not the norm. It has existed for a tiny sliver of human history, and it is built on a set of assumptions about children, about learning, about what childhood is for, that most humans who have ever lived would find completely bizarre. The assumption that children need to be taught rather than allowed to observe and participate. The assumption that play needs to be educational to be valuable. The assumption that parents are solely responsible for their child's development, rather than sharing that responsibility with a broader community. The assumption that children need to be protected from difficulty, rather than gently introduced to it. None of these are natural. All of them are recent. And some of them, the evidence increasingly suggests, are actively making things worse. None of this means we should go back to living in bands on the savannah. Antibiotics are real. Vaccines are real. The knowledge in those parenting books, when it's based on actual science rather than marketing, can be genuinely useful. But there's something worth sitting with here. Every generation of humans before ours raised children without anxiety, without a market telling them they were doing it wrong, without a constant low hum of fear that they were somehow failing their kids. They had something we've lost. Not information, not resources, not better tools. They had each other. They had a community that shared the weight. They had children who were free to fail in small ways before they had to face big ones. They had a world that made room for the mess and noise and chaos of childhood without trying to optimize it into something quieter and more manageable and less alive. Your child doesn't need a better curriculum. They don't need more structured activities, or better screen time limits, or the right pediatric sleep specialist. They need what every child in the history of our species has needed: to be held, to be free, to belong to something larger than just their parents. You already know this. Somewhere underneath all the noise and the books and the advice and the comparison, you already know this. The ancient parents knew it too. They just didn't have anyone trying to sell them an alternative.